In this video, I want to talk about 10 different tricks, hacks, things that I have done over 30 years of being in the green industry of getting seeds started. I've started thousands and thousands of seeds over the years. We're going to talk about these things here in front of me. We're going to talk about domes. We're going to talk about dampening off. We're going to talk about heat mats. We're going to talk about when to fertilize. How do we speed up germination? Should I be watering over the top or should I water from the bottom like these trays allow me to do? Should I use the quote-unquote baggie method? We'll talk about dry stratification. We'll talk about the potting mix that I like to use. We'll talk about light requirements of plants and also my trick for pre-treating seeds that have not been treated. Hi, I'm Dr. Tom Warren and you're watching The Plant Doctor. Let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about are these humidity domes. Why do we use a humidity dome? So when we think about starting a seed, if a seed is in the soil and we water it, that soil has 100% humidity. It is saturated. And as that seed begins to grow, it's going to grow into an atmosphere that doesn't have as high as a humidity, especially if we're starting these indoors. A lot of times when we use these domes, we're using them indoors. And if the domes were off of these, so I've got some started here already. I need to transplant these. These are some cantaloupes and watermelons here that are starting to lean over a little bit. As these seedlings come out of the tray, so the first couple of millimeters above the soil is going to have the same humidity or very close to it that the soil does. But as they begin to grow, especially if we're running our heat during the winter time, we're starting these in February or March for planting in April, they're going to quickly enter an environment where the humidity might be 20% or 30%. We want to continue to give these seedlings a high humidity environment, and that is the reason we like using the humidity domes. It keeps the humidity high on the plants. So you notice here I have two types of domes. I've got a tall dome and it has these little flaps on the side, and then I have a dome where it's maybe 3 inches tall, as opposed to this one that is 10 inches tall. I recently saw a YouTube video that said use the small height dome because it holds in more moisture. Well, that's simply not true. Once this is saturated, 100% humidity is 100% humidity. So if you're seeing condensation on this tall dome, you have reached 100% humidity. You cannot hold any more water in the air than what is already there. Same with this, 100% is 100%. So don't think that having the smaller lid creates a higher humidity environment. That's simply not the case. I like these taller domes here because if we look at these seedlings that I've already have started here, they would already be hitting the top of this dome, and that's not what I want. So right now it's mid-March for me. I'm about a month out from planting any of this. And so the goal is to leave these in here for another few days. They're starting to root in pretty good. I want these completely rooted, and then I'm going to bump them up into a bigger pot, and I'm going to leave them in an enclosed area where they're not exposed to frost or freeze. That is the goal with these plants. I can't really do that. I can't leave these plants in this dome as long as I can leave these plants. Also, with the vents on the side, I can control humidity. So what I've done with these is over the course of the last week or so, as these seedlings have come up, I've slowly began to open the vents and lower the humidity in here. Notice there's no condensation on this dome right now. This is known as hardening off. We're slowly exposing these seedlings to an environment closer to what they're going to be growing in here in about a month. So I'm a big fan of using the tall domes as opposed to the small domes. You may be thinking, Dr. Warren, I don't want to start 72 seeds in my house. I just want to grow like 2 or 3 tomato plants and I'm going to be a happy camper. To do that, use what's called the baggie method. So take a solo cup or a styrofoam cup, fill this up with soil, put your seeds in the top, water them, then take a little Ziploc sandwich bag, make you a little humidity dome right here. So all you want to do is pull this over. Once you have it over, take a rubber band, put that over the sides of the cup just like that, and you have created a humidity dome. So you can get your seeds started in here, and then as they germinate, you know, you start to see some little green leaves, little seed leaves pop up. You can take the rubber band off and let a little bit of air get in there real slowly, and then by the third or fourth day, just take it off, and you have your seedlings in a cup ready to go. The next thing I want to talk about is dampening off. So what is dampening off? Dampening off is when your seedling comes up, and if you look at the base of the seedling where it touches the soil, the stem tapers down to a point, and your seedling falls over at that point. That is dampening off. And the best way to treat dampening off is just not to get dampening off to begin with. So how do we prevent it? So as your seedlings come out, as those seed leaves, the first two leaves that come out of the seed are known as cotyledons or seed leaves. As you see those, you want to decrease the humidity that they're exposed to. You actually want your soil to dry out just a little bit. No longer do we want a saturated soil. We want to dry it out, and that's going to prevent dampening off. As that soil dries out, you can water it. You know, plants need water, right? So we can't completely ignore the water, but what you want to do is let that soil dry out just a little bit. You do not want it saturated. If it stays constantly saturated, you're going to have dampening off of your seedlings, and you're not going to have any vegetables for your garden. Another way to discourage dampening off is air movement. On warmer days, when you know you're not going to have a frost or a freeze, put those seedlings outside. Let the wind move in and through your seedlings, and that's going to strengthen those stems up. It's also going to prevent dampening off. If you can't do that, you can always turn on a fan for a little bit. Let the fan blow back and forth between your seedlings, and that is also going to encourage those stems to get stronger, and it's going to deter dampening off. A question I get a lot is, Dr. Warren, do I need a heat mat to start my seedlings? And my answer is, with like a lot of things, well, it depends. For most seedlings, if you're starting them indoors and you're in a heated environment, you do not need supplemental heat. So most of your seeds are going to come up just in that ideal room temperature range of 65 to 70 to 74 degrees, somewhere in there. They're going to come up just fine. Now, there's a few exceptions to that rule, and the ones that I can think of off the top of my head, if you're growing peppers, if you're wanting to start okra, they like hot temperatures. You may want to use a heat mat in that situation in order to get germination started. I've had a situation before. I tried to grow some peppers in a dome. I did not have heat underneath them, and the seeds rotted before they germinated. And from there on out, I started using a heat mat, and I always have my peppers successfully germinate because I'm putting supplemental heat up underneath the tray here, and that's rising up through the soil layer, encouraging those peppers to germinate. So do you need a heat mat? It depends on what you're trying to grow. One of the questions I get asked most is about fertilizers, and in particular, fertilizers for plants that are just starting to wake up or just coming out of germination. And so what are we doing with these? So we need to kind of take 2 or 3 steps back before we jump right into fertilizers and look at the cross section of a seed. So if you cut a seed in half, you're going to see there's an embryo in there, and the rest of it is something called endosperm. And endosperm is the food for the embryo. And what we see happen is that embryo shoots out 2 leaves. Some people call them seed leaves. Some people call them cotyledons. Cotyledons is the correct scientific term for those 2 leaves. And at that point, they don't need fertilizer because they have all sorts of carbohydrates and proteins being provided by that endosperm. Now, as the roots begin to develop and we see the true leaves, so the true leaves will take on a more characteristic look of the plant that you've planted. The cotyledons all kind of look the same regardless of the plant. They're kind of rounded. They take on the shape of the seed kind of. They don't have any margins or sinuses or indentions. But once those true leaves come on board, that is the time to fertilize if you're not using a soil media that already has fertilizer in it. So if you're using a product like Miracle Grow potting mix, you probably don't need to add any fertilizer to it. If you're using something that's just straight peat moss or straight pine bark, or you planted in the soil itself, my recommendation is use some sort of slow release fertilizer that has the micronutrients in it as well. So you're looking for of course, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium, the NPK, the 3 numbers that are on the bag. That's what those stand for, the percentages of those. Now, there's also other things that plants need. They need things like sulfur. They need things like molybdenum. They need things like copper. They need things like zinc. The list goes on. I think there's 16 or 18 nutrients that a plant needs in order to complete its life cycle. If you use something like Osmocote, it's going to have all those little micronutrients in there, and that is going to help encourage a nice, full, healthy plant as it comes out of germination into a mature plant. Can you speed up seedlings to germination? If you're already providing them with an ideal environment, the answer is no. But if the temperatures that you're providing them with are cold, or there's not enough moisture in your humidity dome, then yeah, you can speed it up. I've seen some videos, people, oh, I can germinate this plant or this plant in 24 or 48 hours, and they really don't tell you what they're doing. And then they edit their film to make it look like that they've got these nice, healthy plants in 24 hours. With somebody with a 30 years of experience in an undergrad and a PhD in horticulture, don't buy that, okay? You can speed up some things with heat. As I mentioned earlier, peppers and okra, you can speed up with heat. But as long as we are providing our seeds with the high humidity environment and the correct temperatures, the process of germination is just the process of germination. You can't magically somehow speed this up. Which brings me into my next topic that I want to talk about, and that is, should I be watering from over the top, or should I be watering from the bottom like you can do in these humidity domes? So these humidity domes, you can take out these inserts and water underneath, and the water soaks up through capillary action through the soil to get moisture to your seedlings. And my answer to that is, well, it depends on what I'm trying to grow. If it's a really small seed, like a tomato or a pepper, I like going bottom up, because the reason is, as I water over the top, sometimes what will happen, that seed will actually get carried by the water from one of these cells into the next cell, and then I have a cell with two peppers or 2 tomatoes in it, and then I have a cell with none. So I prefer the bottom up method with the smaller seeds. For larger seeds, you can water over the top, mainly because I'm not concerned about those splashing over into another cell. They weigh enough that they're not going to be moving around when I water over the top. So really, it just depends on the size of the seed for me, and it really boils down to personal preference, what you want to do. If you're collecting your own seeds from a previous year's crop, one thing that you'll want to do is stratification. So what is stratification? Stratification is going to be exposing those seeds to a cold period before you plant them again the following spring. So what you would want to do is take a Ziploc bag and a paper towel that is slightly moist, put your seeds on that slightly moist paper towel, and then put this paper towel into the Ziploc bag and put it into your refrigerator for 60 to 90 days, depending on the type of plant that you're growing. Different species of plants have different requirements for chilling or stratification. What does this do? This is going to mimic winter. So a lot of plants, the seeds lay dormant on the ground through winter, and then as we warm up, they'll germinate. So we're mimicking winter when we do this. Some seeds will not germinate unless they've had a cold stratification treatment. Depending on the species of plant that you're growing, it depends if you need this process or not. So I would encourage you to Google stratification treatment for whatever plant that you're trying to grow. Find a reputable source, preferably something that's from a peer-reviewed journal or an extension service. Every state has an extension service. For me here in Alabama, it's Auburn, so I'd go to auburnextension.edu and look it up. If you're in South Carolina, it's Clemson, and if you're in Texas, for example, it's Texas A&M. If you're in Ohio, it's Ohio State, and the list goes on. If you're in New Jersey, it's Rutgers. If you're in New York, it's Syracuse. But look at those peer-reviewed or extension articles, and that'll give you a good idea if you need to stratify your seeds or not. So what about light and seedlings? I have all this light in this room. There's lights for the camera. There's a light behind the camera. There's lights in the ceiling. This has lights. There's a window over here. There's a lot of light. We think this is a lot of light in this room, but it's really not. And all of this is full spectrum LED lights that the plants can absorb. But it's not enough light for these plants. I've had these plants on my back porch for a week. When we compare the light indoors, even a really bright room, to full sun outside, there's no comparison. Seedlings need a lot of sunlight. And even these right here, they're not perfect, even though they've been on a south-facing porch. So if seedlings don't get enough sunlight, what happens is they get what we call leggy. They start looking for sun. You'll see the seedlings tilt towards the light. That's known as phototropism, a plant's tendency to grow towards light. And that's kind of what's going on here with some of these squash. They're not bad. What I'm going to do, I'm going to put these out in full sun today, and they're going to be fine. I'm not worried about them. But if this were to continue, I would have long, weak, leggy stems, and it's not really going to support a plant or support the fruit that I want to get off this plant. So as your seedlings enter this stage, there's no true leaves on these seedlings yet. They're still in the cotyledon stage. You want to give them as much light as possible. I hope these tips help you out with your seedlings as we enter early spring, and we're looking forward to planting those gardens and getting out and putting some annuals into the landscape. These are just some tips. It's certainly not everything that I could go over, but I'm trying to be a good, concise video in terms of getting you started in the right direction. If you have questions, if you have comments, please leave those down below. I'll do my best to answer those. Guys, as always, thank you for watching The Plant Doctor, and until next time, happy gardening.